Hello, hello, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, brought to you as always by InsideThePenguins.com. I'm your host, Nick Berlansky, joined as always by Nick Horwat. And Horwat, we are 5 days away from a Pittsburgh Penguins hockey game. Now, that is the prospects game, so you're not going to see Crosby, you're not going to see Malkin, you're not going to see Gensel, you're not going to see most of the guys that you're going to end up seeing play on October 13th at the home opener against the Arizona Coyotes, but it will be a hockey game. It will include Pittsburgh Penguins prospects, and it will be on September 17th in Buffalo, New York, against the Boston Bruins prospect system. So we're getting closer to the NHL season. Training camp is next week. Rookie camp begins here in a few days. I believe it begins on the 15th, which would be Thursday. So it's getting closer. And with that, that also means PTO season, paid tryout season, has begun. So last year, the Penguins brought in Brian Boyle. It ended up being a great story for the Penguins. He was given that PTO after taking an entire season off at the advanced age of either 37 or 38. I can't remember how old he was at the beginning of last season. But he came in, he played 66 games for the Penguins, scored 11 goals, notched 21 points, and became an integral member of the leadership group of that Pittsburgh Penguins team. So last year, a PTO was a big part of the team. Do you see that happening again this season for the Pittsburgh Penguins?
Not one bit.
No?
Not one bit. It was necessary last year because we also knew Malkin was going to miss a lot of time to start the year. We also knew Crosby was going to miss the beginning of the season. So we needed a center. As time went on, we realized we were going to be missing Rust for a minute. Jake Gensel got hurt pretty quickly. Out of nowhere, it was like, yeah, we needed a PT. We needed that PTO and minor league call-ups all of a sudden. So Brian Boyle, I can remember sitting here in this chair talking to you about it when we found out Crosby and Malkin were both going to be missing time. Mm-hmm. We immediately said, well, Brian Boyle is all of a sudden our fourth line center. And he hadn't even signed the full deal yet. Then we saw where it went. He signed the full 1-year deal, had a respectable season for his position. You know, he played far more than any of us expected and played really well throughout it. So good on Brian Boyle for that. We commended him the entire time for it. He played great and he helped us out a lot, became a leader and became one of the best faces in the locker room. But this year, it's a different situation. We're pretty much fully healthy and we have our lineup just about set. The only thing people are fighting for is like wing positions, and we can fill that with what we have.
Yeah, I think when you look at the Pittsburgh Penguins and what's happened with them over this summer, they've kind of stocked up on that bottom 6, 13th forward, first call-up kind of position. They're about 6 or 7 deep in that spot now. It isn't quality over quantity, but there is a quantity there, and there are opportunities for certain players to step up and become a quality part of the team, similar to what Brian Boyle was last year. But PTO season's already underway. We've seen a couple of news stories that have broke, but none of them have resulted in the Penguins getting a guy on a PTO. Zach Aston-Reese, former Pittsburgh Penguin, somebody that people had believed could become a PTO for the Pittsburgh Penguins, come back and try to earn his way back onto the roster after he had played over 4 seasons in Pittsburgh. He signs with the Toronto Maple Leafs on a tryout contract. The Leafs, they just love former Penguins depth pieces, don't they? They bring in Zach Aston-Reese, and let's not get it wrong. Aston-Reese is still an undeniable asset on the penalty kill, but it's just a matter of the fact that when you look at the Pittsburgh Penguins, they're willing to give up some of their power on the penalty kill to try to get a little bit more scoring in the bottom 6, because that did hamper them throughout long stretches of last season.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually kind of shocked Aston-Reese got a PTO, not a full deal already, given how I'm assuming it's widely known how good his defensive play is. Sure, the numbers took a dip in Anaheim, but Anaheim took a dip all season. They're not a good team. These numbers were going to tank a little bit. But, yeah, I'm shocked for Aston-Reese alone that it was a PTO, not a full deal. I mean, maybe people are that strapped for cash. The Leafs, I think, could make a lot of sense because they could use a little bit more defense from their forwards. We know Austin Matthews isn't doing it. We know Mitch Marner might bring it a little, but it's not at the same level that Zach Aston-Reese can bring. And, I mean, I will never say phenomenal things about John Tavares, but that's just me. I just think he's an overrated player, definitely overpaid, but I don't know what his play style is exactly. Even from his Islanders days into the Leafs, it always seemed kind of slower and not as I mean, he was a first overall pick, wasn't he?
He was, yeah.
He doesn't play like it though. That's the weird part of him. So I think he signs there. I think he gets this deal in Toronto, and I think Aston-Reese becomes a solid fourth line player for them, and maybe finds an offensive spring.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely helps out with their defense.
I don't want to go down a rabbit hole in this, but did you really just try to crush John Tavares for not playing like a first-round pick?
Yeah, I've done it before, and I'll continue to do it again. I remember back.
He was a first-round pick 12 years ago. Like, do you understand that careers? Like, yeah, he's not a game-changing talent. He's not a franchise. He was a franchise player in New York for a long time. It's just the problem is, look at New York. Like, do you think of Barzal the same way? Like, he's not a first-round pick, but he is undoubtedly a star. And again, rabbit hole that we can get into in different discussions. But like, I think you're undervaluating what John Tavares has done through 12 years of his career, whenever he had to spend the first majority of it on an Islanders team that got him no help. But let's talk about the Penguins. Let's talk about former Penguins. John Tavares is neither. Dominic Simone, story came out. Yeah. Taylor Haas of DK Pittsburgh Sports put it out this weekend, said that Dominic Simone was offered a PTO by the Penguins. Their love for Simone knows no bounds, trying to bring him back for the third or fourth time. I'm losing track already. But he turned it down, and instead is going back to Europe, going back to the Czech Republic to play for his hometown team of HC Sparta Praha. So my question to you, Horwat, obviously we know Mike Sullivan specifically, and just the Penguins organization as a whole has a soft spot for Dom Simone, who's a guy that, listen, let's give him his flowers. He's an NHL player. He doesn't have finishing ability. He's not really a play driver. He's a guy that has some pretty good possession numbers, and he's a guy that can make the easy plays. He can't do anything fancy. He doesn't do the hard plays well, and there's the book's out on him on how to get him off his game, which is basically just play a little physical. But he is a quality bottom six guy. The Penguins never used him that way. They always kept putting up higher in the lineup for some reason. But let me ask you this question. If Simone would have agreed, sign that PTO, come to Pittsburgh, do you think he would have had a roster spot come October 13th?
Sadly, yes, because this team is predictable sometimes. I wouldn't have wanted him to make the roster, but that's, again, just my opinion. I really appreciate that you said he is a definite NHL player, and then went on to list all the things he cannot do in hockey. But
yes, he's an NHL talent, but doesn't mean that he's a great NHL player. But there's a spot for him in the National Hockey League if he was gonna come and try to get one. Like, don't lie, he would be a third liner on the Coyotes and be an everyday player. But like, there's a spot for him somewhere. It's just a matter of what he can't do has just not gelled with where the Penguins try to put him, and that's why I said that.
No, I knew what you meant. I just appreciated that it was, he's an NHL player, but here are all the things he cannot do properly.
Listen, you're getting on. I'm not going to sit here.
Hey, you got on me about John Tavares. I'm going to get on you about that.
That's fair. That's fair.
But for Dom Simone, had he signed here, signed a PTO here, I do believe he would have signed here just because the team loves him for some reason. I think he would have filled out the last roster spot. He would have pushed Josh Archibald down a little further and would have just locked up the forward core for any young player that wants to try and make some noise during training camp or in the preseason. I think he would have just kind of gotten in the way. So I'm not super mad that he didn't take it. Heading back home, he seems happy, at least, because every hockey player's dream is to play in the NHL, and when you voluntarily turn down the NHL to go play in Europe, hey, that's what makes you happy. It's also not good that that's the second time that's happened to the Penguins this offseason, but so be it, I guess.
Yeah, we also don't know if Juuso Riikola would have re-signed a contract.
I wasn't even make it 3. I was thinking of
Bjorkquist.
Yeah. So 3 times. Okay, lovely.
No, I also do believe that he had a good shot to make the team if he would have signed that PTO. But I think the biggest thing would have been that's injury insurance for the Penguins. If something happens in the preseason, I mean, at this time last year, with a week to go before training camp, we didn't know Sidney Crosby had a wrist surgery.
Right.
We didn't know that happened. So there's still time that something could come up. We don't know. Like there's players coming back from injury. Jason Zucker couldn't even sit on the players bench last year in the playoffs. We don't know. Like we've heard reports that he's doing fine. He looked good in the Beauty League, but again, that's That's old timers, basically. That's pickup. So unless you're Teddy Bluger and you like to get into fights there. But no, nonetheless, I think he would have had a good shot to make the team. Do I think he makes the team if nobody gets injured in preseason? No, just because, like I said, there's not really a spot for him. They've gone out and signed guys that do similar things like that he does. Josh Archibald being chief among them. I think Josh Archibald brings exactly what Simone brought, which is smaller guy, scat guy, a guy that gets in there without the puck and does some pretty good things, and he's decent with possession. Now, Archibald, I think, is not going to get – I would – if the over-under was set at 25 games, I'd say under for Josh Archibald in 2022-23. If it goes over, you're in some serious issues with health and injuries. But I do think when closing the book on the Simone conversation, I do think he would have had a shot to make the team, but it would have been at the expense of either somebody else getting injured or somebody else playing so poorly that they thought, okay, well, Dom Simone's better than what we've seen from this guy. But I think that's what would have had to happen.
Yeah, it absolutely is. We were in a different situation last year. That's what I'm going to keep pulling this conversation back to, is that we were just in a different situation last year with Brian Boyle coming in to fill out the roster and make the team and become a key contributor. This year we have our healthy roster. We keep talking about how Evgeny Malkin's coming into the season fully healthy for once. It's the first time it's happened in a while. We keep talking about how Sidney Crosby he's coming into seasons fully healthy, but he's got his group back. It's going to be and he's going to start the season. It's going to be a little different than it was last year. So that's why a PTO doesn't make sense for the Penguins specifically.
Yeah, and if there's a guy, and we'll talk about it, if there's a guy that comes in on a PTO that really shouldn't be on a PTO, should have got a contract already this summer, then that's props to Ron Hextall if he's able to corral a guy like that. But I think there's one person that we're all thinking about. We talked about him a couple episodes ago, and we'll talk about him here in a couple seconds. But if you want to see a nice article on a couple of players that potentially could be PTO'd by the Pittsburgh Penguins or signed to a PTO is what I should say. Jacob Puntori, our buddy over at InsideThePenguins.com, put out a nice piece over the weekend, and including a couple of names of players that could theoretically be signed to a tryout contract with the Pittsburgh Penguins with just over a week until the beginning of training camp. There's one guy on that list that we've talked about. We're not going to spoil the whole list, but we do want to talk a little bit about Evan Rodriguez because he isn't signed. Theoretically, it seems as if he's the hottest commodity on the free agent market right now. The best piece left. We've heard rumors that there's 4 to 5 teams that have actual graded interest in bringing him on. And he did switch clients this summer to Darren Ferris, as you reminded me before the show. So the question is, do you think Evan Rodriguez signs a PTO at this point? Not even with the Penguins, but do you think he signs a PTO and that's how he gets onto a team next season?
No, I bet he signs a full deal.
Yeah.
The way the national media and really just the national media has been hyping up Evan Rodriguez, they keep looking at his numbers and seeing half a point per game and going, look what this guy can do. Look how he can produce through a full 82-game season. Mm-hmm. To which I say, look at the back half again, please, and come back to me with your argument. Don't get me wrong. Yeah, Evan Rodriguez is still going to earn a pretty decent contract because he does deserve it, because you can't ignore the numbers, but you have to look at how absent he was in the back half and look at that as well. I think the Penguins were aware of that, and that's why he's not still here right now and it hasn't been figured out. I think the argument of there's cap constraints is interesting, considering you pay people a ton of money to figure that part out, and that's their only job.
Yeah.
So cap constraints can get figured out. I don't think it would take 3 weeks. Maybe it would take some time, but I don't think it would take 3 weeks for you to organize some ideas of, okay, if we were to pull him in at this number, we'd have to do A, B, and C. Get A, B, and C on the phone. Let's figure it out. I don't think that would take 3 weeks. I don't think it would take a month, however long. I mean, it wouldn't take an entire offseason, that's for sure. I mean, when did free agency open up? That's kind of when this whole conversation would really begin. Mm-hmm. So at this point, I don't know what's going on with Evan Rodriguez. I mean, he's going to earn a deal. I don't think it should be here. That's just me. I went on that tangent, gone on it a couple times now. Mm-hmm. but I don't think he's getting overhyped by a lot of people, but he does have a great opportunity to sign a pretty player-friendly deal here somewhere for a team that could spend that money.
I'm pretty sure Toronto was one of the rumored teams. So with them signing Zach Aston-Reese to a PTO, it seems a PTO shouldn't block anything because realistically that has no cap implications as of yet. But I don't know if he's going to end up going to Toronto. Calgary's another team that was on that list, but I agree with you. I don't see Zach Aston-Reese. I don't see Evan Rodriguez signing a PTO. I really don't. And I think when you look at it, every summer, free agency, it's like a game of musical chairs. Teams only have so much cap space and so many roster spots and so many things that they can do in one offseason. And I mean, look at Calgary. I mean, they seem to have an unlimited supply of chairs up there because, you lose 2-star players, you bring in 2-star players plus a really good defenseman. There's still room on that roster to be improved. But when you look at things like that, and also especially that he changed agents, I think the approach was off at the beginning of the offseason. And that's going to ruin a lot of things as far as you trying to get back into it. Because if you take the wrong approach and you don't get a contract, look how many other people have signed. Look how many other people have signed that are in Evan Rodriguez's position. So there's already such a roadmap for what he could be making. And I think guys like Danton Heinen taking a $1 million contract, that hurts everything. So when you look at Evan Rodriguez, I don't think he signs a PTO. I think he's worth an actual contract. But at this point of the year, it's really tough to tell, man, because training camps open up in 10 days. At this point, if you don't sign a contract and you don't sign that PTO and you're holding out for that contract, you might not play the beginning of the season.
Yeah. You gotta sign something too.
And it's not like Evan Rodriguez is a guy that has a storied history of success in the National Hockey League. He had a really good season last year, which skyrocketed his personal value, and he hasn't been able to take advantage of that this summer. So I don't think he signs a PTO, but as every day goes on, it becomes more realistic that goes from an actual contract to signing a PTO. I'll be so surprised if I'm already surprised that we're at this point with Evan Rodriguez in the summer.
We are. Yeah, it is surprising. I'm just trying to look through teams that might be able to afford. I mean, how much is he going to be making? Like, it couldn't be past $3 million. It couldn't.
No, it's not. I don't even think it's past 2.5, to be completely honest. I think it probably bounces back up to that $2 million he was making when he first came to Pittsburgh, the contract that he signed with Buffalo. But, you never know, because he also showed at some points last season that he's top 6 caliber and he's defensively responsible. So it's interesting with Evan Rodriguez. It's a really intriguing case study, really, in NHL contract structure and how this entire situation works. If a guy that had the season that he did last year, you can say what you want about it. The talking points are he scored 19 goals last year, and despite being bad in the second half, was really good for the Penguins in the postseason. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that entire saga plays out. The door is not entirely closed on Pittsburgh. If he comes back to Pittsburgh, I would think it would have to be on a PTO. I don't know if they're going to be able to make any of that fit. But like you said, there are people that do that for a living that could probably figure something out. But nonetheless, he's running out of time to get onto a team.
He is running definitely out of time. I'm just trying to flip through teams who would make sense, but
yeah, it does. It's not.
It's not working. The closest thing I could find might be Detroit, but I don't even know if that makes all of the sense.
That wouldn't be bad because they're in a similar situation where they were pretty good last year, had some down moments, and they're looking to keep getting better. And that's where Evan Rodriguez is at in his career. But we're going to take a quick break. When we return, I just have an opinion about the Penguins going for their 4th Stanley Cup of the Crosby era. I want to share that, get Horwat's reactions, and get your reactions. Always, you can you can message us on Twitter at Ice-Burgh Podcast, and you could also probably leave a comment underneath our Apple Podcast. We'll get that, rate and review, and we'll get to that. And if not, you can also comment on our YouTube channel at Inside the Penguins. But we're going to take a quick break. When we return, just an opinion of mine that I'm going to share about the Penguins going for a 4th Stanley Cup. Welcome back to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, brought to you as always by InsideThePenguins.com. We're getting closer and closer to the opening of training camp. I'm excited. You see most of the Penguins are already back in Pittsburgh, skating in an informal skate. Sidney Crosby joined the group late last week, so that's good to see as well. Kenny Malkin was all smiles, according to Danny Shirey on Twitter. But I have an opinion here, Horwat, that I've been thinking of for the past couple days since our last recording. I want to give you the idea. I want to share it, see what you guys all think out there listening to this podcast. The question I asked myself was, how important is that fourth Stanley Cup? Because we know that's the goal for Crosby, Malkin, and Chris Letang. They're going for that fourth one. It would be the sixth in Pittsburgh Penguins history. But how important is that fourth one for Sidney Crosby and the rest of that aging veteran core that we've been talking about all summer long? I think it would make them the undoubted top team in the 21st century in the National Hockey League. And I think there's a couple other teams that really can make a case for that. The Detroit Red Wings of the 2000s were very good. I mean, so many Hall of Famers, so much talent, so many good seasons. But the last decade has been pretty bad in Detroit. And we finished the last segment saying, yeah, they're on an upward trajectory, but it's been a while since they've been in that postseason. So I think they get eliminated from that pretty quickly. But I think it would, first and foremost, prove once again that they have the ability to get back after time. Think about the fact they won their first one in 2009, early in Crosby and Malkin's career. Then it took 7 years for them to get back in 2016 and 2017. 7 years, and they were able to bounce back, become that juggernaut team that we saw in 2016 and 17, the first back-to-back champions since the Red Wings back in the late 90s. But not only that, a Stanley Cup this season would be 6 years since. So we're almost as far away from the 16 and 17 championships as they were from the 2009 championship. It's kind of crazy to think. So it would show that it doesn't matter if they have 4 straight first round losses. Even at the age of 36, 37, 38, they're able to get back there because they're just that good. Also, you would pass the Blackhawks 4-3. You would pass the Tampa Bay Lightning 4-3. And even with that, the Tampa Bay Lightning did it with 2 different cores. They did it in the early 2000s with Vinny Lecavalier, with Marty St. Louis. Dwayne Rollison, was that their goaltender at that point? I think it was.
I don't remember.
But then, of course, the 2020 version with Stamkos, Kucherov, Vasilevsky. So, but you would be past the Lightning despite them doing it with 2 different cores. And the Penguins doing it with 1.
Nikolai Khabibulin, by the way.
Nikolai Khabibulin. Rollison was on the Oilers that year, who they faced. That's right. But also, there's a couple other important distinctions if they're able to do that. They double up the 90s Penguins, 4-2, and they had way less Hall of Famers. Like, they didn't have Ron Francis to be their third best player. Like, say what you will about Phil Kessel. He's not Ron Francis. Okay? That's not it.
No.
They don't have a Kevin Stevens who's out there being the best power forward in hockey. Like, Jake Gensel is great, but I don't think Jake Gensel is Hall of Fame. Kevin Stevens isn't Hall of Fame yet. Kevin Stevens has a much better case than Jake Gensel, in my opinion. So that's the other thing. And the last thing I'll say, at that point, they would have done it with 3 different goaltenders: Fleury, Murray, and Jarry. I don't know why they all end with a Y, but either way, that would be the winning success method for the Pittsburgh Penguins. I think if they won that 4th Stanley Cup, to me, it would make them the undoubted top team of the 21st century thus far.
It would have to, by sheer fact of cup wins. It would have to for statistics. It would have to for longevity, because again, that playoff streak is still intact at 16 years, and that's not going anywhere. I would assume it goes to 17 this year. It would have to, with the way Crosby and Malkin put up numbers throughout their entire career. Crosby's yet to have a year under a point per game.
Yep.
Malkin's only done it like 2 or 3 times, I think. Those numbers are ridiculous. They're coming close on being the trio with the most games played together, are they not?
They are definitely climbing that leaderboard, and they're already pretty high on it.
I mean, imagine if they didn't get hurt the entire time. Those 3 specific, all 3 of those players are injury prone. Imagine if they hadn't gotten hurt through these last 15 years together. They're beating that number already.
Well, if fifths were fifths, we would all be really drunk. But
and also,
I digress.
If they didn't get injured, hell, we may have already be talking about them as 4-time Cup winners, 5, maybe even 5, depending on.
That 2011 team remains one of the biggest what ifs in my life.
Oh, yeah. But moving on from that, I think they would definitely have to be. And you're talking about the doubling up of the 90s teams. One thing about the 90s teams is, yeah, it was built with Hall of Famers, but you got to figure in 91, 92 was, if it was like today's NHL, Jágr would be on his rookie contract still.
Mm-hmm.
So there's
so would Recchi.
And Recchi would still be on his rookie deal, although he was only here for the first one. Still, it was a young player coming in. I mean, yeah, we built a good team that in that 91 season with, bringing in Coffey a few years before, bringing in, like you said, Ron Francis that year, Olfie. And then the next season, shipping out Francis for Rick Tocchet. Yeah. And those moves that were made for the second season to contribute. That was what made that 90s team good and is what is always talked about as one of the best teams of all time. Mm-hmm. It had Mario. It had young Jágr, like I mentioned, rookie contract Jágr, if you will. Brian Trottier was there. He was already a veteran presence and future Hall of Famer. Mm-hmm. Paul Coffey was there for a season. Larry Murphy, Hall of Famer. The 90s team built itself on future Hall of Famers, whereas the 16, 17 teams
built around
them and ran their stuff on depth.
Yeah.
That was always the big part because Tom Kunak went on to the Islanders and ate it. He was not good anymore. Yeah. But here he was a folk hero. Carter Rowney was so much fun to watch in the 17th series. He didn't do much, but he was fun to watch and be a small contributor in the way that he was. Mm-hmm. And that is kind of the game that is being played in the NHL in this era rather than the 90s. So, yeah, I can see where you're coming from. I totally agree that it would make the Penguins the biggest team of the 21st century. Mm-hmm. And doubling up the old team sounds like a ton of fun. I think as for how important it is, I think that was the basis of this question. I kind of got lost in all of your reasonings. I wanted to expand on it.
Mm-hmm. That's why it's important to me because I think it is, to clarify, it's not important because it'll put them in the conversation of best teams. It's important because they're already in that conversation. Yes. And that to me is the dagger in the heart. Undoubtedly, this is the team. And the only other person that can touch them is Tampa Bay, but Tampa Bay has to get back and win a couple more then.
That's on sheer cup count too. Because because you do have to look at all of these teams that came through. I mean, you had to dig back a little bit. If you really wanted to, you could argue Colorado's up in that argument. They won in 2001, had Patrick Waugh for a couple seasons, Joe Sakic and Forsberg for the end of their careers. Mm-hmm. And then they came back right now in the 2022 and won a cup again with a new team. I get there was a lot of downside in that, but they're in that discussion just like how I feel. Who was I going to say?
But, I mean, franchises is one thing.
Yeah.
Franchises is one thing. But team, like these teams you mentioned, Forsberg, Sakic.
It's a different team.
Sakic was the GM last year. Like, that's the thing. Like this, when we're talking about this, that's why I say the only teams are really those early Red Wings teams, even though they only had a 10-year run, basically. I mean, if you wanted to count the 90s, they were good in the 90s too. But like when in the 2000s, that was it. There was 10 years in this century. The Tampa Bay team, you could say that because Stamkos has been, that team has been that good since 2010 because of Stamkos. Like they've always been there. Mm-hmm. Down season here and there, but they've always been there. And it just took them too long to break through. And then the Blackhawks, Kane, Taves,
that's where
Keith before he left, stuff like that. That is what I meant by team. Like this grouping together has done it. So I guess I didn't clarify that, but that's what I meant. That's why I was only putting those other teams in there because I think the Avalanche get tossed out. The Devils get tossed out because they won a couple in the early 2000s
and then went back in later, but that was it.
Yeah, and then they made the Cup Finals in 2012 as a Cinderella folk hero story, and then lost. So
to another Cinderella folk hero.
Correct. It was a battle of the glass slippers, but no, that's what I meant by that. And I honestly think that they're already in that conversation. It's already debatable that they are, but that puts a nail in the coffin and puts them in that leaderboard pretty healthily if they get to that fourth Stanley Cup with this core.
Yeah, for sure. No, it would. It definitely, because of the longevity of the team, all those years not missed in the playoffs, winning seasons. this, that, the other, phenomenal stuff. You're totally right. Digging back a little too far was a mishap on me, but I mean, that's just the part of hockey.
Yeah.
It's a ton of fun to watch.
It's where the conversation ends up going. I just wanted to clarify that that's not what I was saying with that whole rant to start. But we're going to take a quick break. Thanks for humoring me with my little take that I had thought about over the weekend. But we're going to take a quick break. When we return, our weekly Pens poll. Welcome back to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, brought to you as always by InsideThePenguins.com. We have our weekly Pens poll, Horwat, part one of two weekly Pens polls that we're going to ask. This one was, which prospect do you believe will stand out the most at Penguins training camp? We've talked about a couple of these guys on last week's episode when we were saying who could make the biggest jump at training camp this year. So we asked this question. It ended in a tie for first place between Valtteri Puustinen, who we talked up basically all of last regular season. It started with Jesse Marshall, friend of the show from The Athletic, coming on and telling us, hey, this 7th round pick is a lot better than people think, and he's going to show it at Wilkes-Barre this year. He did just that, had a really good debut last year. 43% of voters said that he's going to stand out the most among Penguins prospects at camp. And then the story that we've talked about all summer long, Pierre-Olivier Joseph got 43% because that's the guy we've been talking about is, hey, he has a chance. He could make the team out of camp. He could be an everyday player. So 43% of voters have taken what we've said there to heart and think that he will be the most impressive prospect at Pittsburgh Penguins training camp. Other players that got votes, Sam Poulin got 14%. I'd like to think that that was swayed by our conversation about Poulin last Thursday on that episode. Go check that out if you haven't already. And you know what this all tells me? That Philip Hollander is going to be the standout guy because he got no votes. I don't know how often that has happened when we've actually put an option, a fourth option in there, and they've gotten zero, like none, zilch, nada. No votes for Philip Hollander to be the most eye-popping Penguin prospect at camp, which tells me that maybe he is, because of all these guys, he might be the guy with the best chance to make the roster out of camp.
He just might be, but I like the idea of Philip Hollander doing well. I'm still going to hold on to my flag at Sam Poulin. I think I talked about it last week. Not ad nauseum, but for a pretty good amount because it's his turn to finally make that breakthrough. He's getting the quote-unquote national recognition with that rookie camp thing and being recognized by the Penguins themselves as, hey, you're the rookie to go this year. You're the guy. Go represent and come back and prove what you can do. I'm not saying make the team straight out of camp, but I'm saying everything I said last week. He's got a great opportunity here. It's not his time now more than ever. Could he use a little more time in the AHL? Maybe, but as a first person to get called up this year, go for it. I love it.
And somebody we didn't put on this list, just I think because he's so far away from the NHL level, we wanted to include guys that were all in around the same area right now, which means all in the AHL could theoretically play in an NHL game or multiple NHL games this year. The guy that we didn't mention in this poll and didn't really mention last week is Owen Pickering. He was very impressive by all accounts at the development camp back in July. So if he comes out and plays well, and he could be very impressive. That's all I'm saying is like he could be somebody where you get more of an extended look. You get to see him with more players that are better. It could be very interesting to see what he looks like in camp. And he's somebody that could really stand out. I mean, it helps that he's 6'4", but he's somebody that could really stand out at camp that we haven't really mentioned. And I do want to make sure the people have his name at least in their mind when camp gets underway, when rookie camp gets underway in 3 days, because he'll be there as well.
Just to keep an eye on. Yeah, just to keep watching. He may not be fully committed to a professional team yet, but just to keep an eye on him in camp and then to watch him play back with the Switch Current, yeah, in the dub. So just keep an eye on him, watch him progress, whether it be with our system or with WHL's still. something to watch him grow. He's only 18, right? He's got plenty of time to really make an impact as a Penguins prospect. He's already up there. We don't have much, so he's already up there in the top 5, bare minimum, maybe even higher. So it's time to all eyes go toward him once we realize what we have with everyone else.
Yeah, he is arguably the best defensive prospect in the Penguins prospect pool, and he's only been in the organization for 2 months. Between him and P.O. Joseph, so that's where the Penguins stand as far as their development programs are right now. But that's going to do it. That's going to do it for this episode of the Tip of the Ice-Burgh. We'll be back on Thursday, the opening day of rookie camp, talking a little bit about all the guys hitting the ice on Thursday afternoon. We'll see you guys then. Have a great week, Penguins fans.